The rain had been falling since dawn, and by the time she reached the courthouse steps, the hem of her dress was heavy with mud. It was the only dress she owned that was not patched or torn beyond repair, and once it had been the color of cream. Now it was the color of the road. She did not look down at it. She did not have time to care about the dress. Her name was Maren Ashcombe, and her father was going to hang in 3 days. The stone steps of the courthouse were slick under her thin shoes, and she climbed them slowly, one hand pressed against the cold, wet railing. Her breath came out in small white clouds. Somewhere above her, a bell rang the hour, and the sound of it seemed to press down on her shoulders. 10 in the morning. She had been walking since 4. The soles of her shoes had worn through somewhere on the last mile, and she could feel the grit of the road against her heel with every step. She could smell wet stone and horse and coal smoke, and underneath all of that, the sharp iron smell of her own fear. She had never been to a courthouse before. She had never been to any building larger than the parish church at Little Wenham, and the parish church at Little Wenham could fit inside the front hall of this place 3 times over. The doors were tall and black, and studded with iron. A footman in a red coat stood on either side of them, and neither of them looked at her as she passed. Inside the air was warmer, and it smelled of beeswax and old paper and men. Her eyes took a moment to adjust. There was a long hall with a stone floor and a high ceiling, and men were walking through it in dark coats, carrying papers, speaking to each other in low voices. Nobody looked at her. She was not the kind of woman anyone looked at in a place like this. She was small and pale, and her hair had come loose from its pins in the rain, and her dress, once cream, was now mud, and she was clearly a country girl who had walked in from the wet. She stopped a man in a black coat who was passing her. "Please," she said. Her voice came out cracked. She had not spoken to anyone since she left the inn at Threadneedle Cross at first light. She tried again. "Please, sir, where is the courtroom of the assize?" The man looked at her for a moment. He was not unkind, but he was in a hurry. He pointed down the hall. "Second door on the left. But the sitting has begun. You cannot go in." "I must go in," she said. The man had already walked on. She stood in the hall for a moment, gathering herself. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the front of her dress and made them stop. She had come too far to shake. She had walked 23 miles in the rain, and she was going to be heard. And if she was not heard, she was going to fall on her knees on the courtroom floor and beg. She had decided this 3 days ago, when the letter had come. She had decided it again every hour since. She walked to the second door on the left. She put her hand on the door. She opened it. The courtroom was very warm and very full. The air inside was thick with wool and wet leather, and the wax of many candles, and there were men in wigs sitting on benches, and men in coats standing along the walls, and at the far end of the room, on a raised platform, a single judge sat behind a high desk. She could not see his face clearly from the door. She could only see the shape of him. Dark robes, a white wig, broad shoulders, and a stillness that made the whole room seem to lean toward him. A clerk was reading from a paper. His voice was flat and quick. Nobody had noticed her yet. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft, heavy sound, and a few heads turned. Then the clerk stopped reading, because the judge had lifted one hand. The judge was looking at her. She could not see his eyes from that distance, but she could feel them. It was the strangest thing she had ever felt. It was as though someone had put a warm, heavy hand on the back of her neck, and she could not have moved from that spot if the whole room had caught fire. "You," said the judge. His voice was not loud, but every man in the room heard it. Come forward. She could not remember, afterward, walking down the length of that room. She remembered the sound of her wet shoes on the stone floor, and she remembered a man in a green coat looking at her with his mouth slightly open, and she remembered the smell of the candles growing stronger as she moved deeper into the room, but she did not remember her legs moving. Her legs seemed to belong to someone else. She stopped in front of the high desk. She looked up. He was younger than she had expected. Not young, but not the old man in a wig she had pictured every night for 3 days. He had a hard, clean face and a strong, straight nose, and his eyes were the colour of wet slate, and he was looking at her the way a man looks at a horse he is deciding whether to buy, not unkindly, but without softness. She had never in her life been looked at that way, and she found that she could not look away. "State your name," he said. "Maren Ashcombe." Louder. "Maren Ashcombe, sir. And what brings you into my courtroom, Miss Ashcombe, during the sitting of the assize?" She had prepared this speech. She had said it aloud on the road, over and over, until she could say it without stopping. But now that she was standing there, under those slate eyes, the speech was gone. All of it. Every word. She said, "My father." He waited. "My father is Thomas Ashcombe, sir. He is to be hanged on Friday. For a thing he did not do." There was a small sound in the room. A whisper. A chair moving. The judge did not turn his head to see who had made it. His eyes did not leave her. "Every man in the dock says he did not do it, Miss Ashcombe." "Yes, sir, I know that, sir. But my father truly did not do it, and I have walked from Little Wenham to tell you so." "Little Wenham," he said. He said it as though he was tasting the name. "That is more than 20 miles from here." 23, sir. You walked." "Yes, sir, in the rain." "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a long moment. The whole room was quiet. She could hear a candle on the wall behind her sputter in a draught. She could hear her own breath. She could hear, somewhere far away in the building, another bell ringing. "Miss Ashcombe," said the judge, "you understand that this is not the proper way to petition the court." "I do not know the proper way, sir. I only know my father. You could have engaged a solicitor." "I have no money for a solicitor, sir. I have no money at all. I have this dress and my mother's shawl and the shoes I stand in, and none of them are worth anything." Somewhere in the room. A man laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. She did not turn to see who it was. The judge did turn. Slowly, he looked toward the sound. He did not speak. He simply looked. The laughter stopped, and it did not come again. He looked back at her. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Sir?" "Tell me why your father is in my gaol." She did not know if she was allowed to speak so freely. She looked at the clerk, who was staring at her with round eyes, and she looked at the men on the benches, and she looked back at the judge. He was still watching her the same way. "Waiting. He is a shepherd, sir. He has always been a shepherd. He works for Mr. Halston at Wenham Farm, and he has worked for him for 19 years. 6 weeks ago, a lamb went missing. And then 2 more. And then a ewe. And Mr. Halston said it was my father who took them, and he brought the constable, and they found the skin of a lamb in our woodshed. And my father did not put it there, sir. He would not. He would never. He has been a shepherd for 19 years, and he has never once taken so much as a length of rope from that farm. Then how did the skin come to be in your woodshed?" "I do not know, sir, but I know who I think put it there." "Who?" "Mist, Halston's own son." Now the whole room made a sound. It was small, but it was there, and the judge lifted his hand again, and the sound stopped. "Miss Ashcombe," he said. His voice was very quiet now. That is a heavy thing to say. "Yes, sir, you had best say why you say it." She took a breath. Her hands were shaking again. She pressed them against the front of her dress. Mr. Halston's son is called Peter. He is 19. 2 years ago, when I was 17, he came into the sheepfold when I was carrying water to my father. And he put his hands on me. My father saw. My father put him against the wall and told him if he ever touched me again, my father would break his arms. Mr. Halston was there. Mr. Halston did nothing. But Peter has hated my father since that day, and 2 weeks before the lamb went missing, Peter met me on the road and said he would see my father swing before the year was out. The judge did not speak for a long moment. Did anyone else hear him say this? No, sir. We were on the road alone. Then it is your word. Yes, sir, against the word of a farmer's son, and the evidence of a skin in your woodshed. Yes, sir. He looked down at the papers on his desk. He turned one of them. He turned another. She watched his hands. They were long and clean and hard-looking, and there was an old scar across 2 knuckles of the right one. She wondered how he had come by it. Then she was ashamed for wondering, because her father was going to hang on Friday, and she was thinking about a stranger's hands. He looked up. Where is your mother, Miss Ashcombe? Dead for 6 years now. Fever. Brothers? Sisters? A brother. 4 years old. Who has him while you are here? Mrs. Doak. Sir, our neighbour. She said she would keep him for 2 days. I must be home tomorrow night, or she cannot keep him longer. And if your father hangs on Friday, Miss Ashcombe, what then, for you and the boy? She had not let herself think about this. Not once. Not in the whole 23 miles. Her throat closed. She looked at him, and she wanted to answer him without her eyes filling, but she found that she could not. Her eyes filled anyway. She did not lift her hand to wipe them. She stood very still and let the tears fall, and she looked at him, and she said, Then I do not know, sir. Then I do not know at all. He watched her for a long time. Nobody in the room moved. At last he set down the paper he was holding. The court will recess, he said, for 1 hour. Clerk, take Miss Ashcombe to the small chamber. Give her something to eat and something dry, if such can be found. See that she is not disturbed. The clerk sprang up as though he had been struck. Yes, my lord, she said. She did not know if she was allowed to speak. Please, my father, your father is not being hanged today, Miss Ashcombe. He is not being hanged tomorrow. Whether he is hanged on Friday is a matter I will consider. You will wait. Yes, my lord. Go. The clerk touched her elbow. She let herself be turned. She walked out of the courtroom on legs that still did not feel like her own, and behind her she felt the weight of every eye in that room, and above all of them, heavy as a warm hand on the back of her neck, the eyes of the judge. The small chamber was a room with a table, and 2 chairs and a fire. The clerk brought her a plate of bread and cold beef, and a cup of small beer, and he brought her a wool blanket that smelled of cedar, and he set it all down, and left her. And she was alone in the room for the first time since she had begun walking at 4 in the morning. She sat down. She looked at the food. She could not eat it. Her stomach was tight and small. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders instead, and she let the fire warm her feet, and she found she was crying, silently, without knowing when she had begun. She cried for a while. Then she stopped. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the bread. She thought of her little brother, 4 years old, whose name was Bram, and who had cried when she left him at Mrs. Doak's door, because he thought she was not coming back. She had told him she was coming back. She had promised. She thought of him, and she picked up the bread, and she ate it, because she had to be able to walk home tomorrow, and a woman could not walk 23 miles on nothing. She ate the bread and the beef. She drank the beer. She sat by the fire, and she waited. She did not know how much time passed. She thought she might have slept, sitting up. When the door opened, she started. It was not the clerk. It was the judge. He had taken off his wig. His hair beneath it was dark and short, and slightly damp at the temples from the wig's weight. He was younger without it. He was tall. He filled the doorway. He closed the door behind him and stood there, looking at her, and she got to her feet, because she did not know if a person was allowed to sit while a judge stood. "Sit down, Miss Ashcombe." She sat. He crossed the room and sat in the other chair. He did not sit like a judge. He sat like a man. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the fire for a moment, not at her, and she took the chance to look at him properly for the first time. He was perhaps 30, perhaps a little older. He had a hard face, but it was not a cruel face. His mouth was straight and his jaw was strong, and there was a small line between his brows that looked as though it had been made by years of listening to men lie to him. "Miss Ashcombe," he said. He did not look at her yet. He looked at the fire. "I must tell you something, and I must ask you to hear it without alarm. Yes, sir, I am not, in the ordinary way, a judge." She stared at him. She did not understand. "I sit today as a magistrate of the assize. That much is true. But I am not called to the bench by trade. My name is Alistair Kentmere. I am the Duke of Ravensmore." She did not know what to do with this. She had never met a duke. She had never expected to be in a room with one. She had certainly not expected one to be sitting 3 feet from her, in a chair by a fire, in a small dry room, looking at flames. "I sit today," he went on, "because the assize judge is my cousin, and he is unwell, and I have some training in the law, and it was a favor. This is a thing I do from time to time. I sit, and I hear cases, and I decide. Not many people know it is me. It suits me not to be known. Yes, sir, yes, my lord." He looked at her now. "Miss Ashcombe, I am going to ask you a question. I want you to answer it truthfully. If you lie to me, I will know. Do you understand me?" "Yes, my lord." "Did you come here today knowing who I was?" "No, my lord. You did not come to plead your father's case to the Duke of Ravensmore. I did not know there was such a person, my lord. I came to plead the judge, whoever the judge might be." He looked at her for a long moment. She met his eyes. She did not look away. It was not defiance. It was that she had nothing left to hide, and she did not have the strength to invent anything. He nodded once. "I believe you." He was quiet. "Miss Ashcombe, I did not stop the court because I believed your story. I stopped it because I did not know yet whether to believe it. I have heard many stories in that room. Most of them are lies. Almost all of them are told by men who have practiced them. Yours was not practiced. That does not mean it is true. It means it is different. Yes, my lord. I am going to give you a chance to say more. Not in the courtroom. Here, just to me. You may tell me anything. If you have exaggerated any part of it, tell me now, and I will not hold it against you. If any part of it is not true, tell me, and I will treat you fairly still. What I will not forgive is a lie held to." She looked at him. "My lord," she said, "I did not exaggerate. I did not lie. I told you what happened. I did not tell you every small thing, because I did not know if I was allowed. But there is no part of what I told you that is not true. My father did not steal those sheep. Peter Halston put that skin in our woodshed. I will swear it on any book you put in front of me, and if I am wrong, I will accept whatever comes." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Tell me the small things, my lord. The small things you did not tell me." "Tell me now," she thought. "He is a good man, my lord, my father. He does not drink. He does not curse. He read to me when I was small, though my mother was the one who taught me to read. He has hands that are hard from work, but he has never once raised them to me, or to my brother, or to my mother, in all his life. He mends other men's fences without being asked. When a lamb is sick, he sits up with it. When the old shepherd, Mr. Dowd, died 2 winters ago, and there was no one to bury him, my father dug the grave himself, because the ground was frozen, and no one else would. She stopped. Her throat had closed again. Go on. He is 54. He is not a strong man anymore, in his body. If they put him in that gaol another month, he will die there without a rope. He has a cough, my lord. He had it before they took him, and I have heard from the gaoler that it is worse. I gave the gaoler the last shilling I had to look in on him. I have no more shillings. How did you eat, Miss Ashcombe? On the road. I did not eat, my lord. There was nothing to eat. He looked at her plate. It was empty. He looked back at her face. When did you last eat, before that bread? Yesterday morning, my lord. A little porridge. He said nothing for a moment. Then he stood. He went to the door. He opened it. He said something quietly to the clerk. He closed the door and came back. He sat down again. There will be soup, he said, in a few minutes. You will eat it. My lord, you will eat it, Miss Ashcombe. I am not asking. She looked at her hands. Yes, my lord. He was quiet. Miss Ashcombe, I am going to tell you something, and I am going to ask you to keep it between us. Do you understand? Yes, my lord. I have been to Wenham Farm. I have not been recently. But I have been. I know Mr. Helston not well. I have met him twice, and I know his son. She looked up. Peter? Yes, how, my lord? He was brought before me 2 years ago, in this same courthouse, for a thing done to a girl at an inn near Barlow Cross. His father paid the girl's family, and the charge was withdrawn before it reached the bench. But I read the papers. I remember the name. She did not know what to say. I tell you this, he said, because I want you to know that when you spoke of him, I was not hearing him for the first time, and when you told me what he did to you in the sheepfold, I was not surprised. I believed you before you finished your sentence. But I could not say so, in that room, in front of those men. Do you understand why? I think so, my lord. Tell me. Because if you had said so, they would have said you were led by your feelings, and your judgment would not be trusted, and then no ruling you made would help my father. He looked at her. He did not smile, but something in his face shifted, very slightly. It was not warmth. It was closer to recognition. Yes, Miss Ashcombe. Exactly that. The soup came. It was brown and hot, and it smelled of onions and pepper, and there was another piece of bread with it, and a small pat of butter. She had not seen butter in 3 weeks. She looked at it, and she looked at him. He said nothing. He waited. She ate. He watched the fire while she ate. He did not watch her. She understood, somehow, that this was on purpose, that he was giving her the small dignity of being hungry without being seen to be hungry. She ate slowly, though she wanted to eat quickly. She used the spoon carefully. She did not spill. When she had finished, she set the spoon down on the plate the way her mother had taught her, and she folded her hands in her lap. Only then did he look at her again. Miss Ashcombe, there is a thing I am going to do. I am going to send a man to Wenham tonight, a man who works for me. He will speak to your neighbours. He will speak to Mr. Helston's other labourers. He will not tell them why he is asking. He will come back to me by Thursday night with what he has learned. If what he learns matches what you have told me, then on Friday morning I will not allow the sentence to be carried out. I will order a new hearing. Your father will be brought to a court where the evidence will be looked at again, properly. and Peter Helston will be looked at as well. Do you understand? Yes, my lord. If what my man learns does not match what you have told me, Miss Ashcombe, then your father will hang on Friday. I will not stop it. I cannot stop it. Not on the word of a girl I do not know. Do you understand that, also? Yes, my lord. Then that is what will be done. She lowered her head. She did not know if she was allowed to weep in a duke's presence, and she did not weep, but she was close. Thank you, my lord. Do not thank me yet, Miss Ashcombe. He stood. She stood too. Where will you sleep tonight? I will begin walking, my lord. I must be back by tomorrow night for my brother. He looked at her. He looked at the window, which showed the same grey rain as the morning. He looked back. You will not walk tonight. My lord, I must. You will not walk tonight, Miss Ashcombe. I am not asking. There is an inn at the end of this street called the Green Bell. You will sleep there. In the morning a carriage will take you to Little Wenham. It will collect your brother, if you wish, and bring you both back to the town to stay with Mrs. Havering, who keeps a boarding house I know well, until Friday. You will not walk back and forth across the county in the rain in that dress, waiting to hear whether your father lives. That is not a thing I will allow. She stared at him. My lord, I cannot pay for any of this. You are not paying for any of this, Miss Ashcombe. But do not argue with me. You will lose. She did not argue with him. He took a card from his coat and set it on the table. That will get you a room at the Green Bell. Show it to the woman at the counter. Do not lose it. When you leave in the morning, the carriage will find you. His name is Wick. He will know you, yes, my lord. He looked at her one more time. Miss Ashcombe, whatever comes of this, I want you to know something. You did well today, walking in like that, standing where you stood, speaking as you spoke. I have watched grown men in that room shake themselves apart for less. You did not shake. Remember that. She could not speak. He nodded once, and he left. She stood in the small chamber for a long time after he was gone. The fire cracked, the candle on the wall guttered. She sat down slowly in the chair he had used. It was still slightly warm. She put her hands on the wooden arms where his hands had been. She sat. She had walked in that morning expecting to fall on her knees and beg. She had walked in expecting to be dragged out. She had walked in expecting to be laughed at, cursed at, ignored. She had not expected any of what had happened. She did not yet know what to think of it. She knew only that she had come here to save her father, and she had for the moment kept him alive another day. That would have to be enough for now. She picked up the card. She held it. She stood. She went to the Green Bell. The woman at the counter of the Green Bell looked at the card and her whole face changed. She looked at Maren's dress. She looked at Maren's face. She said, "Come with me, dear," and she took Maren by the elbow and led her up a set of narrow wooden stairs to a small, clean room at the back of the inn. There was a bed with a real quilt. There was a jug of water on a stand and a basin. There was a small fire already lit. There was a plain nightdress folded on the pillow that looked as though it had been prepared for someone. "For me," Maren said. "For you, dear." The woman drew a hot bath in a copper tub in the corner of the room. She did not ask any questions. She helped Maren out of the wet dress and hung it by the fire to dry. She combed the tangles from Maren's hair with a wide wooden comb, and she did it gently, and Maren stood in the warm water with her eyes closed and let herself, for the first time since the letter had come, be cared for. She slept that night in the clean bed under the quilt, and she did not dream. In the morning, before it was fully light, a heavy hand knocked at her door. "Miss? Coach is ready when you are. My name is Wick." The carriage was black and plain and pulled by 2 brown horses, and Wick was a broad man with a grey beard and a face like an old apple. He handed her up without speaking much, and he asked her the way to Little Wenham, without any surprise at where he was going, and he drove her there through the grey morning at a pace her feet could never have matched. They stopped at Mrs. Doak's cottage a little after noon. Bram came out of the door and stopped on the step and looked at the carriage with his mouth open. "Maren?" She got down. She knelt in the mud in the dress that was still slightly damp. She held out her arms. He ran to her. "You came back," he said into her shoulder. "You came back. You came back. I said I would." Mrs. Doak came to the door. She was a small, strong woman with a hard mouth and kind eyes, and she looked at the carriage, and she looked at Maren, and she looked at Wick, and she said, "What is this, then, Maren Ashcombe?" "I do not fully know, Mrs. Doak. I will tell you when I know. Is your father? He is alive. He is still alive. And a man is asking questions in the village who I think will find out the truth. But I must go back to the town, Mrs. Doak, until Friday. I am to stay at a boarding house. Bram is to come with me, if you can spare his things." Mrs. Doak looked at Wick. Wick tipped his hat. "He seems a proper man," Mrs. Doak said. "Come inside, then. I will pack the boy." While Mrs. Doak packed Bram's small bundle, Wick got down from the carriage and walked, slowly, through the village. He stopped at the Smiths. He stopped at the well. He stopped at the door of the old woman who sold eggs. He spoke to none of them for very long. But he spoke to all of them, and when he came back, his face was thoughtful, and he said nothing to Maren about it, and she did not ask. They drove back to the town in the fading afternoon light. Bram fell asleep against her arm before they had gone 3 miles. She watched his small face in the shifting light, and she thought, over and over, the same 3 words. "Please, please, please, Mrs." Havering's boarding house was on a quiet street near the river. It was a tall, narrow building of grey stone, with clean white curtains at every window. Mrs. Havering herself was a woman of about 50, with a wide face and steady eyes, and when she opened the door, she looked at Maren and Bram. And she looked at Wick, and she said, "Come in, my dears, come in out of the cold." She did not ask a single question. She showed Maren and Bram to a room on the 2nd floor with 2 narrow beds and a window that looked out over a small walled garden. There was a fire already lit. There was soup already on the stove downstairs. It was as though the whole house had known they were coming. Because, Maren realized slowly, it had. She did not see the Duke on Wednesday. She did not see him on Thursday. She kept to the house. She played small games with Bram in front of the fire. She helped Mrs. Havering peel potatoes and shell peas, because she could not simply sit and be fed like a lady, and Mrs. Havering did not stop her. On Thursday afternoon, Mrs. Havering said, quietly over the potatoes, "Miss Ashcombe, may I say a thing?" "Please, His Grace does not often send people here." Maren looked up. "He has done it twice before in the 10 years I have kept this house. Once for a young widow with 2 children, whose husband had been killed by his own brother, and whose brother was trying to take her house. Once for an old servant of his, who had nowhere else to go when he grew too weak to work. Both of them stayed until they could stand on their own. Neither of them ever heard His Grace speak of it after. I did not know. I know you did not know, dear. I only tell you so that you understand what kind of a man he is. Some people, when they help, must have the whole world see them do it. He is not one of those. When he does a thing, he does it, because it should be done. He does not require to be thanked." Maren set down the potato. "He does not require to be thanked," she said, more to herself than to Mrs. Havering, no dear. "Then I shall thank him only once, when I see him, and after that I shall not speak of it again." Mrs. Havering smiled a small, tight smile. He would like that, I think. That night, Maren could not sleep. She lay in the narrow bed, and she listened to Bram's breathing. And she thought about her father in the gaol. And she thought about the man Wick, walking through Little Wenham, asking his careful questions. And she thought about Peter Halston. And she thought about the Duke, sitting in his study somewhere in this town, reading whatever Wick had brought him. Deciding. She thought most about the Duke. She thought about the moment in the courtroom when he had turned his head, slowly, to find the man who had laughed. She thought about the moment in the small chamber when he had told her to eat. She thought about the way he had said, "You did well today." She thought about how, in her whole life, no one had ever said that to her before, in exactly that way. She fell asleep at last, near dawn. Friday morning came cold and clear. The rain was gone. The sky was a hard blue. Wick came at 9. "His Grace asks for you, miss." She left Bram with Mrs. Hevering. She wore the dress she had come in, which had been washed and mended by Mrs. Hevering's own hand and hung by the fire and pressed with a hot iron. And now, though it was still poor, it was clean, and it hung on her more like the dress it had been long ago, when it was a young girl's dress and not a beggar's. Wick drove her back to the courthouse. The courtroom was fuller than it had been on Monday. Word had spread, somehow, that something was to happen. Men she did not know looked at her as she walked down the aisle. She did not look at them. She looked at the empty bench at the front. She sat where the clerk pointed her. A door opened at the side. 2 guards came in, and between them, thin and grey and stooped and blinking at the light, was her father. She made a small sound she could not help. He lifted his head. He saw her. His face changed all at once in the way faces change when they see something they had thought lost. "Maren," he said, across the whole room. His voice cracked. "Maren, love, silence," said a guard, but not unkindly. She half rose. She sat down again. She pressed her hands flat against the front of her clean dress. She did not weep. She would not weep here. Not yet. The clerk stood. "All rise for his lordship." She rose. The Duke came in through the door behind the bench. He was in the black robes and the white wig again. His face was closed. He did not look at her. He looked at the papers on his desk. He sat. "Be seated." The room sat. He looked at last up. "Thomas Ashcombe," he said. Her father lifted his head. "Yes, my lord, Thomas Ashcombe. You were tried in this court 6 weeks ago for the theft of 4 sheep from the flock of Mr. Silas Halston of Wenham Farm. You were convicted upon the evidence of a lambskin found in your woodshed, upon the testimony of Mr. Halston, and upon the testimony of his son, Miss Peter Halston. You were sentenced to hang, and that sentence was to be carried out this day." Her father said nothing. "In the last 4 days," said the Duke, "new evidence has been brought before me. This evidence was gathered privately by a man in my employ in the village of Little Wenham. It consists of statements from 6 of your neighbours and from 3 labourers at Wenham Farm." There was a small sound in the room. The Duke did not lift his hand this time. He simply looked at the room, and the room grew quiet. "The statements are consistent," he said. "Mr. Peter Halston was seen, on the night before the constable was called, near your woodshed, carrying something wrapped in cloth. He was seen by 2 of your neighbours, independently. Neither of them came forward at the time because they feared Mr. Halston, the father, who is a large landowner in that parish. In the years before your arrest, Mr. Peter Halston was heard to threaten you, by name, on at least 4 separate occasions, in the presence of witnesses. He was also 2 years ago brought before this court on a charge of assault against a young woman at an inn near Barlow Cross, a charge which was settled privately and does not appear in the public record, but which is known to me. The Duke paused. Furthermore, this court has learned, through inquiries made yesterday, that Mr. Peter Halston attempted to sell the pelts of 2 of the 4 missing sheep to a tanner in Threadneedle Cross on the morning of the day before the constable was called to your cottage. The tanner has provided a statement. He remembers Mr. Halston. He remembers what was offered. He was paid for his silence at the time, and he is not proud of that. But he has spoken now. A man in the back of the room said something under his breath. The Duke's eyes moved to him. He was quiet. Thomas Ashcombe. On the evidence now before this court, I find that your conviction was unsound. Your sentence is set aside. You are, as of this moment, a free man. There was a sound in the room like a rush of wind. Her father's face did not change at first. It was as though he had not heard. Then it changed all at once. His shoulders came down. He put one hand on the wooden rail in front of him. He held it hard, as though otherwise he would fall. "My lord," he said. "Sit down, Mr. Ashcombe, before you fall." Her father sat. Maren was crying now. She did not remember when she had begun. Her face was wet. She did not lift her hand to wipe. She looked at her father, and she looked at the Duke, and she thought her chest would break in 2. The Duke was not finished. Mr. Silas Halston. Mr. Peter Halston. You are to appear before this court on Monday next to answer for the charge of perjury and, in the case of Mr. Peter Halston, for the theft of livestock and for the attempt to have another man hanged in your place. You will not leave this county in the meantime. Constable Byrne, see to it. A large man near the door bowed. Yes, my lord. The Duke closed the papers before him. He stood. This court stands adjourned. The room rose. He walked out. She was still weeping. Her father was being brought to her by a guard, who was, she saw with astonishment, half smiling. Her father crossed the last space between them and put his arms around her, and she felt his ribs through his coat, and she smelled the gold on him, and she did not care. She held him. She held him for a long time. "Maren," he said into her hair. "Maren, my girl, what did you do?" "I only asked, Papa, I only asked." Wick was there. Wick was patient. Wick let them stand like that until they were done, and then he cleared his throat, very quietly, and he said, Miss Ashcombe, His Grace asks if you will come to a room down the hall for a moment." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. Yes, of course. The room was the same small chamber she had sat in on Monday. The fire was lit again. There was tea. There was bread. Her father sat down heavily in one of the 2 chairs and looked around him as though he had never been in such a place. The Duke came in a few minutes later, without the wig, without the robe. He had a plain dark coat on, and his shirt was very white. He looked, in that room, less like a judge and more like a man. Her father tried to stand. "Sit. Miss Ashcombe, sit." Her father sat. The Duke stood by the fire for a moment, looking at it. Then he turned. "Mr. Ashcombe, I am sorry." Her father blinked. "My lord, you have spent 6 weeks in a gaol for a thing you did not do. That is a wrong done to you by the county in which you have paid your tithes and worked your work for 19 years. It is a wrong I cannot undo. I can only end it. I am sorry it went on as long as it did." Her father did not know what to say. Maren said, "My lord." He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "I said I would say it only once, so I am saying it now." "Thank you." He held her eyes. He nodded once. "You are welcome, Miss Ashcombe." He turned to her father. "Missy Ashcombe, Wick will take you and your daughter to the boarding house of Mrs. Havering, where your son is waiting. You will stay there until Sunday. Mrs. Havering will feed you and see to your cough. On Sunday morning, Wick will drive you home to Little Wenham. You will find, when you arrive, that certain matters have been settled in your absence. Mr. Halston will no longer employ you. But he will not need to, because a small piece of land at the edge of my own tenancy, 12 acres, which has been without a shepherd for some years, is yours to work if you will have it. There is a cottage on it. The cottage is small but sound. There is a stove and a well and enough pasture for perhaps 60 sheep. You will pay no rent for the first year. After that, the rent will be what a shepherd can pay. Her father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. You may refuse, Miss Ashcombe. If it offends your pride, you may refuse, and I will make some other arrangement. But I would be glad if you would take it. Her father found his voice. My lord, I do not know what to say. Say yes or say no. Not now. Tell Wick by Sunday morning. Yes, my lord. The Duke looked, for a moment, at Maren. His face gave nothing away. But something in his eyes did. Then he was gone. They were driven to Mrs. Havering's. Bram, when he saw his father, made a sound that was not a word, and threw himself into her father's thin arms. Mrs. Havering wept, quietly, in the doorway. Mrs. Havering, who Maren had by now understood, was a woman who did not weep easily. The rest of the day was a blur of soup and tea, and the small, ordinary miracles of being alive together in one room. That night, when Bram and her father had both gone to bed, Maren sat by the fire in the front room, with Mrs. Havering, and she said, Why did he do it, Mrs. Havering, all of it? Mrs. Havering was quiet for a while. You should ask him, dear. I could not. You could. I think you could. I have no way to ask him. He is a duke. I am a shepherd's daughter. Mrs. Havering looked at her over the rim of her teacup. Miss Ashcombe, he has asked through Wick whether you would take tea with him tomorrow afternoon, in this house, at 3. He asked me to ask you. He said if the notion troubled you, I was to say nothing, and he would not raise it again. But he asked. Maren looked at her. Here? Here, alone with him? With me in the next room, dear, for propriety. But yes, alone with him at the table. Maren looked at the fire. Yes, she said. Please tell him yes. She did not sleep well that night either. At 3 the next afternoon, she came down the stairs in her cream dress, which Mrs. Havering had by now mended a second time, and which looked, in the winter light, almost like a dress a girl might wear to a village dance. Her hair was pinned. Her hands were clean. Her father, who was sitting by the parlour fire wrapped in a blanket, looked at her as she passed and said nothing, but his eyes were bright. The Duke was already in the small back sitting room. He rose when she came in. He was in a plain coat again. Not the black robe. Not the wig. Just a man in a coat, with dark hair and slate eyes, and a mouth that did not smile easily. Miss Ashcombe, my lord. Please sit. She sat. He sat. Mrs. Havering brought the tea and set it down and went out. The door was left open a hand's width. It was proper. He poured the tea for her. She noticed his hands again, the old scar across the knuckles, the steadiness. He set the cup in front of her without spilling a drop. Miss Ashcombe, I asked you here because there is a thing I want to say to you, and I did not wish to say it in a courthouse. Yes, my lord. When you came into my courtroom on Monday, I did not know you. I did not know your father. I did not know your village. I heard your name for the first time from your own mouth, and I heard the shape of your story, and I thought, I confess this, I thought it was very likely you were mistaken about your father, or exaggerating for love of him, or perhaps not honest at all. That is what I thought. Yes, my lord. I did not act because I believed you. I acted because I did not know yet whether to believe you. And because, He stopped. She waited, because, he said, when you stood in that room in your wet dress, and when the man in the green coat laughed, and when you did not turn your head to look at him, I understood, in a way I cannot fully account for, that I was looking at a woman who did not know she had done anything remarkable. And it occurred to me that I had spent many years listening to women who had done nothing remarkable, and knew it, but expected the world to bow anyway, and that the difference between them and you was so large that I could not look away. She lowered her eyes to her tea. I sent for Wick, he said. I gave him his instructions. I told him to go carefully, and to bring me only what he could stand behind. I did not tell him what I hoped he would find. He does not work that way. But I hoped, Miss Ashcombe. I hoped he would come back with the truth I had already begun to suspect. And on Thursday night, he did. Yes, my lord, I could have ended it there. Your father would have been freed. You would have gone home. That would have been enough. Yes, my lord. It was not enough. She looked up. I have been thinking since Monday about what you did, walking 23 miles in the rain, standing in a room full of men who could have crushed you with a word, saying what you said, not shaking when you said it, weeping only at the end, and even then, standing where you stood. My lord, anyone would have no, Miss Ashcombe. No, they would not. I have sat in that chair enough times to know. She was quiet. I do not know, he said, how a person is meant to say what I am about to say. I am not practiced at it. I have no useful example. So I will say it plainly, and you will forgive me if it comes out badly. Yes, my lord. He put his hands on the table. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at her. I would like to know you, Miss Ashcombe, not as a judge knows a petitioner, not as a landlord knows a tenant, as a man knows a woman whose company he wishes to keep. I would like to call at Mrs. Hevering's from time to time, when you are still in the town, and then when you are home in Little Wenham with your father and your brother. I would like to call there, if your father allows it. I would like to bring you a book from time to time, if you would read it. I would like to sit at your father's fire, if he would have me, and listen to him talk about sheep, because I have never listened properly to a shepherd talk about sheep, and I suspect I have been the poorer for it. I would like this to go on for as long as it wishes to go on, and if at the end of it you have no wish for me to call again, I will not call again, and I will not hold it against you. I ask nothing more than that. She could not speak. He waited. He did not push. He simply waited, with his hands on the table, and his eyes on her face, and the winter light coming in through the window and falling across the teacup between them. She thought, in that long moment, about her father in the room above them, alive. She thought about Bram, 4 years old, asleep on the couch by the fire. She thought about the 23 miles in the rain, and the empty stomach, and the mud on the courthouse steps. She thought about the man who had laughed. She thought about the way this man across from her had turned his head. She thought about a card set down on a table, about a soup she had not asked for, about a carriage waiting in a village she had left on foot, about 12 acres and a cottage and no rent for a year, about a small kindness Mrs. Havering had told her of, one she had not been meant to hear, that this man had twice before done a version of this for 2 strangers, and had never once spoken of it after. She looked at him. My lord, she said. Her voice was steady. I am the daughter of a shepherd. I have one dress. I cannot dance. I have never been in a room like the one you must live in. I do not know the names of the forks. I cannot ride a horse. I cannot read French. I am not clever in the way ladies are said to be clever. I would embarrass you before your people. Not because I meant to. Because I would not know how not to. He listened without moving. But she said. But my lord, if you would still call, if you would still bring the book, if you would sit at my father's fire, then I would like it very much if you did. He did not smile, but his eyes did. Something moved in them that was like light breaking on water. Then I shall call, Miss Ashcombe. Yes, my lord. And the rest of it, the forks, the French, the horse, none of that is required. It never was. I do not care for forks. I speak enough French to insult a Frenchman, which is all any Englishman needs. I have horses enough for both of us. Your father's fire is more than sufficient. As for the room I must live in, you have already been in one such room. You walked to the front of it, and you spoke, and no one in that room forgot you. I do not think any room will trouble you, Miss Ashcombe, not when you have made your mind up to be there. She lowered her eyes. She was smiling. She had not smiled in 6 weeks. It felt strange on her mouth. Thank you, my lord. That is the second time you have thanked me, Miss Ashcombe. You said you would only thank me once. I have changed my mind, my lord. He looked at her. And then, at last, he smiled too. It was a small smile. It did not last long, but it was there. And it was for her. And she saw it, and she folded it carefully away in her mind, to keep. They drank their tea. They spoke of small things. He asked her the name of her brother, and she told him. He asked her the name of her father's dog, and she told him. He asked her what she had read, and she told him, honestly, that she had read the Bible and one book about the wars in France, and a book of poems by a woman called Mrs. Bowen that her mother had left her, and nothing else worth speaking of. He said he would bring her something. He asked her what kind of thing she would like. Something with people in it, my lord. And a place I have not been to. A novel. If that is what such a thing is called, that is what it is called. Miss Ashcombe. He left at 4. He stood at the door and put on his hat. He said good night to Mrs. Havering. He looked at Marin once, from across the small hall, and he nodded to her, and she nodded back, and he went out into the winter dusk. The winter passed. Her father took the 12 acres. He was slow at first. The gale had cost him a great deal, but by the first thaw he was on his feet in the pasture again, moving among a small flock, and his cough had eased, and Bram had learned to whistle for the dog. The cottage was small, but it was warm, and there was a stove and a well and a window that looked out toward the low hills. The Duke called. First at Mrs. Havering's twice, before Marin went home. Then at the cottage, once a fortnight. Sometimes more, sometimes less. He brought books. He sat at the fire. He listened to her father talk about sheep, and he asked good questions. And her father, who had never in his life sat in a room with a duke, began to speak to him as though he was simply a man who wished to learn a thing. Bram climbed on his knees and pulled at his coat and was not shy of him. The dog put its head on his boot. He never came empty-handed, and he never came grand. Small things. A book. A jar of honey. Once, when he learned that Marin's mother had loved a certain kind of pale yellow rose that had grown outside their old cottage before the fever, and had died with her, he came the next visit with 3 cuttings of the same rose wrapped in wet cloth, from his own gardens. He never spoke of what he was doing. He simply did it. In the spring of the 2nd year, on a warm evening when the light stayed late and the hills were the colour of new leaves, he walked with her to the top of the low rise behind the cottage. They stood, at last, without her father or her brother nearby. He took her hand. He did not kneel. He did not make a speech. He looked at her and he said, "Miss Ashcombe, marry me." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. Yes, my lord. I will. He lifted her hand. He pressed it once against his mouth. She felt his breath on her knuckles. She felt his heart under the fine wool of his coat, when he laid her hand back against his chest for a moment. She felt the wind off the hills, and she smelled the new grass and the wood of the little fence behind them, and she heard, very faintly, from the cottage below, Bram calling to the dog, and her father laughing at whatever the dog had done, and it seemed to her, standing there with her hand under his, that she had never in her life been more warm, or more clean, or more seen. They were married that summer, in the small parish church at Little Wenham, and her father walked her down the aisle in a coat the Duke had made for him, and Bram carried the ring on a little cushion, and Mrs. Havering wept in the third row, and Wick, who had come, stood at the back with his hat in his hands, and the sun came in through the plain glass windows and lay across the stone floor in long, clean squares. She wore a new dress. It was pale cream, the colour the old dress had once been. She had chosen the colour on purpose. She had not told him why. He had not asked, but when she came in through the door of the church, and he looked at her, standing at the front in his dark coat, she saw, from the way his eyes moved once down, and once up, and then settled, that he had understood. She saw him nod, very slightly, to himself. She walked to him. She stood beside him. The priest spoke, and they answered, and it was done. Afterward, in the low sunlight, in the churchyard, with the people of Little Wenham standing around them holding cups of the small beer the Duke had sent for the whole village, he leaned close to her ear so that only she could hear. And he said, "You wore your only dress to beg for your father's life, Miss Ashcombe," unaware that the judge was the Duke, and that he was, though he did not yet know it himself, testing you. I have thought of that day, and I have thought of that dress every day since. I want you to know that. She looked at him. I know it, my lord. You are not Miss Ashcombe any longer. No, I am not. You are the Duchess of Ravensmore. Yes, and I am the luckiest man in this county. Only this county, my lord. He almost laughed. He did not quite laugh, but something moved in his mouth, and his eyes crinkled, and he said, "In any county you care to name." She smiled up at him. The bell of the little church began to ring. Bram, 4 years old going on 5, ran between the graves shrieking with laughter, and the dog barked, and her father stood at the top of the churchyard, leaning on a stick in the sun, watching them, and Merrin Kentmere, who had been Merrin Ashcombe, who had once walked 23 miles in the rain in the only dress she owned, put her hand through her husband's arm, and she rested it there, and she did not let it go. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.